The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched far above the delegates' heads. Thousands of alien species filled the massive chamber, their voices creating a low hum that echoed off the crystal walls. At the center of it all sat one human. Looking very small and very alone, Ambassador Taiho adjusted his simple black suit and watched the aliens argue around him. He had been sitting in the same chair for 6 hours now, listening to species after species debate whether humanity deserved a place in the galactic community. His water glass was empty, but he did not dare leave his seat. This was too important. The Valkyrie delegate stood up again. Corvian was tall and thin, with blue skin that seemed to glow under the chamber's lights. His forearms moved gracefully as he spoke, pointing at the holographic displays floating above the assembly. "Honored members of the council," Corvian said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "We cannot ignore the evidence before us. This species called humans has a history of violence that should terrify us all. They have killed their own kind in numbers that make even the Krogan Wars look small." Murmurs swept through the chamber. Many delegates nodded their heads in agreement. The Valkyrie were known for their careful research and peaceful ways. If they said humans were dangerous, most species would listen. Corvian waved one of his hands, and new images appeared in the air. Pictures of human wars, destroyed cities, and mass graves floated above the assembly. "Look at their World War II, over 60 million dead. Look at their colonial periods, where they destroyed entire cultures. Look at their ethnic cleansings, their slavery, their systematic murder of different groups." A delegate from the Nephid Alliance raised her delicate hand. Whisper Wind was barely 3 feet tall, covered in soft fur that changed colors with her emotions. Right now, her fur was a worried gray-blue. "The Valkyrie speak truth," she said in her high, musical voice. "But we must also consider their recent changes. Humans have been peaceful for almost 100 years now. Perhaps they have learned from their mistakes?" This caused an explosion of debate. Dozens of species began talking at once, their voices mixing into a chaos of clicks, growls, chirps, and words in 100 different languages. The translation devices worked overtime, filling the air with overlapping voices. "Peaceful?" shouted Bloodclaw, the Krogan representative. He was massive even by Krogan standards, with thick red skin covered in battle scars. "You call their military peaceful? They have the largest space fleet in this sector of the galaxy. But they use it only for defense," argued a Zephyrian diplomat, her crystalline body ringing like bells as she moved. "In 50 years of contact, humans have never attacked another species. Defense?" Bloodclaw laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "They destroyed 3 pirate fleets last year alone, completely wiped them out, no survivors." "Pirates are not a species," pointed out the Zephyrian. "They were criminals attacking trade routes." Ambassador Taiho watched this debate with careful eyes. He had expected this. Earth's leadership team had prepared him for exactly these arguments. Every species in the galaxy knew about human history. The question was whether they would judge humanity by its past or its present. An elder from the wise ones floated forward. These ancient beings were pure energy, appearing as shifting lights in roughly humanoid shapes. When they spoke, reality itself seemed to listen. "Young species often go through violent periods," the wise one said, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "But humans are different. Their violence was not just against enemies. They turned on their own kind again and again. This pattern concerns us." More murmurs filled the hall. The wise ones rarely spoke in council meetings, but when they did, their words carried enormous weight. They had seen civilizations rise and fall for millions of years. Corvian nodded respectfully toward the energy being. "Exactly our point, honored elder. Most species fight others for resources or territory. Humans perfected the art of killing their own. They developed methods of systematic elimination that we have never seen before. Gas chambers, mass shootings, engineered famines. They turned murder into a science." Taiho's hands tightened on his chair's armrests, but his face remained calm. He had read every report, studied every historical document the aliens had gathered about Earth. They were not wrong about humanity's past. The question was whether they understood what that past truly meant. A small voice piped up from the lower sections of the chamber. It belonged to a flitter, one of the butterfly-like species that rarely spoke in large gatherings. But what about their art? The flitter asked, its wings shimmering nervously. Human music, literature, paintings. They create beauty even while they destroy. This confuses us. Art does not excuse genocide, Corvian replied firmly. Many violent species create beautiful things. The question before us is simple. Do we trust our children's future to a species that has proven it will kill anyone, even its own kind, when it suits their purposes? The debate continued for another hour. Species after species stood up to argue. Some defended humanity, pointing to their recent peaceful behavior and their contributions to galactic science and culture. Others condemned them, citing the mountain of evidence showing human capacity for organized violence. Through it all, Ambassador Taiho sat quietly. Several times, delegates looked his way expectantly, waiting for him to defend his species. But the human remained silent, watching and listening. His patience was becoming notable. Many species would have jumped up to argue by now. Finally, the council speaker called for order. She was a neutral, one of the gray-skinned species that had evolved beyond emotions and served as mediators in galactic disputes. We have heard much debate, the speaker said in her flat, emotionless voice. But we have not yet heard from the human representative. Ambassador Taiho, do you wish to respond to these accusations? Every eye in the chamber turned toward the lone human. The hall fell completely silent for the first time in hours. Taiho could hear his own heartbeat in the sudden quiet. He stood up slowly, his movements careful and measured. At average human height, he was taller than some species but shorter than others. Nothing about him seemed particularly threatening. He wore no weapons, no military decorations, no symbols of power, just a simple black suit and a calm expression. Honored. Delegates, Taiho said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. I have listened to your concerns about my species' history. You have presented evidence of human violence, human wars, and human capacity for what you term genocide. He paused, looking around the chamber at the thousands of alien faces watching him. Before I respond to these charges, I have one simple question for this assembly. The silence stretched longer. Every being in the chamber leaned forward slightly, waiting. Taiho's voice remained calm and steady as he asked, "Which planet are we talking about?" The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Delegates looked at each other in confusion. Several began talking at once, their voices creating a buzz of bewilderment. Corvian's blue skin darkened with irritation. Ambassador, we are clearly discussing Earth's history of genocide. Your planet's violent past. What other planet would we be discussing? Taiho nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this answer. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device. With a gentle press of his thumb, a holographic display sprang to life above the assembly. The image showed the Milky Way galaxy, but it was different from the standard star charts most species used. Thousands of star systems were highlighted in various colors, creating a complex pattern of lights across the galactic spiral. Thank you for clarifying, Taiho said quietly. I wanted to make sure we were talking about the same thing. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It felt dangerous. The holographic galaxy rotated slowly above the assembly hall, its highlighted star systems pulsing like a heartbeat. Ambassador Taiho stood beneath it, his hand still on the small device that had created the display. Around him, thousands of alien delegates stared at the unfamiliar star chart with growing confusion. Corvian was the first to break the silence. The Valkyrie delegate's four arms gestured dismissively at the hologram. Ambassador, we appreciate your visual aids, but they do not change the facts we have presented. We are here to discuss Earth's history, not admire star maps. Of course, Taiho replied, his voice still calm. Please continue with your evidence. I am listening carefully. The Valkyrie nodded and activated his own display system. The galaxy. Above them flickered and changed, showing detailed historical records from Earth. Images of human conflicts filled the air: ancient battles, medieval wars, industrial age massacres, and modern genocides. "Let us review the evidence systematically," Corvian said, his voice taking on the tone of a professor lecturing students. "Human history shows a clear pattern of organized violence against their own species. They have developed methods of mass killing that surpass anything we have seen from other civilizations." The first set of images showed ancient human warfare. Armies clashing with swords and spears, cities burning, populations enslaved or scattered. Even in their primitive stages, humans showed unusual creativity in destroying each other. But this was just the beginning. New images replaced the old ones. Medieval battles, religious wars, colonial conquests. As their technology advanced, so did their capacity for violence. They conquered entire continents, destroyed native populations, and enslaved millions of their own kind. The scale of their brutality grew with their power. Whisper Wind, the small method delegate, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her fur had turned a deeper shade of gray. "The pattern is clear," she said softly. "Most species go through violent periods, but humans seem to perfect it as they grew more civilized." Corvian nodded approvingly. "Exactly right, honored colleague. But the worst was yet to come." The images changed again, showing the industrial age of human development. Factories, machines, mass production. When humans learned to mass produce goods, they also learned to mass produce death. The next series of images made many delegates look away. World War I with its trenches and gas attacks, the Armenian genocide, the Russian purges. Images of systematic killing on a scale that dwarfed anything in most species' histories. 20 million dead in their first global war, Corvian continued. But they were just getting started. Within 30 years, they had surpassed even that. Horror. World War II filled the holographic display. Nazi concentration camps, Japanese military brutality, Soviet mass killings, atomic bombs. The numbers floating beside each image grew larger and larger. 6 million, 10 million, 20 million, 60 million, total dead. Bloodclaw, the massive Krogan warrior, leaned forward in his chair. Despite his species' reputation for violence, even he seemed disturbed by the images. "We Krogans understand war," he rumbled. "We fight for honor, for territory, for survival. But this ... this is something else. This is killing for the sake of killing." "Not just killing," added a delegate from the Hive Mind Collective, her voice speaking for millions of connected beings. "Systematic elimination. They built machines for murder. They turned killing into an industrial process. No other species has done this." Ambassador Taiho continued to watch and listen, his expression unchanged. Several times, delegates glanced his way, expecting some reaction to the horrible images of his species' past. But the human remained silent. His hands folded calmly in his lap. The presentation continued through more recent human history. The Cold War period, with its proxy conflicts and nuclear standoffs, ethnic cleansings in various regions, genocides in Africa, Asia, and Eastern Europe. Each new example added to the mountain of evidence against humanity. Even after their global wars ended, Corvian explained, humans continued to find new ways to kill each other. Rwanda, Bosnia, Cambodia, Myanmar. The methods changed, but the results remained the same: systematic elimination of groups they deemed undesirable. A crystalline being from the Silicon Collective chimed in, her voice ringing like wind through glass tubes. "What disturbs us most is their efficiency. Other species kill in rage, in fear, in desperation. Humans kill with planning, with organization, with cold calculation. They make lists of who should die. They set quotas for murder." "Precisely," Corvian agreed. "They have turned genocide into a science. They study it, refine it, perfect it. No other species has developed such sophisticated methods for eliminating large populations quickly and efficiently." An elder from the tree singer race, his bark-like skin creaking as he moved, raised a branch arm. "But honored delegates, we must also consider their capacity for change. Humans have been peaceful for nearly a century now. Perhaps they have outgrown their violent nature? This suggestion created a new wave of debate. Some species agreed that humans had shown remarkable restraint in recent decades. Others argued that a century was nothing compared to millennia of violence. Peace through strength is not the same as true peace, argued a representative from the Pacifist Union. Humans maintain the largest military fleet in their sector of space. They build weapons that could destroy entire planets. This is not the behavior of a truly peaceful species. But they have not used those weapons aggressively, pointed out the tree singer. Their military actions have been defensive or against criminals and pirates. Bloodclaw laughed, his scarred face twisting into what might have been a grin. Defensive? You call the complete destruction of the Black Nova pirates defensive? They left no survivors, no prisoners. Every pirate ship was reduced to atoms. That is not defense, that is extermination. Pirates are criminals, replied a Zephyrian diplomat. They attacked civilian vessels, they killed innocent traders. Stopping them was justice, not genocide. Justice? Corvian's skin flashed brighter, blue with emotion. They could have captured the pirates, put them on trial, imprisoned them. Instead, they chose total elimination. This is exactly the pattern we are discussing. When humans decide someone should not exist, they make sure that someone stops existing. The debate continued for hours, with species after species presenting evidence and arguments. Some defended humanity's recent peaceful behavior, but none could argue with the historical record of violence. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Through it all, Ambassador Taiho sat quietly beneath the rotating galaxy display. His patience was becoming legendary among the delegates. Most species representatives would have jumped up to defend themselves hours ago. But the human just listened, watched, and waited. Finally, as the afternoon session was drawing to a close, the council speaker called for order. We have heard extensive evidence regarding human history, she announced in her emotionless voice. The pattern of systematic violence is well documented. However, we have still not heard the human response to these charges. Every being in the chamber turned toward Taiho again. The human stood up slowly, his movements still calm and measured. He looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of various delegates. Honored Council, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. You have presented thorough evidence of human capacity for organized violence. Your research is accurate and complete. We do indeed have a long history of systematic elimination of populations we consider threats or obstacles. Murmurs swept through the hall. Many delegates had expected denials or excuses. Instead, the human was confirming their accusations. However, Taiho continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembly, I notice your evidence focuses exclusively on Earth's internal conflicts. You have documented our wars against other humans, our genocides against human populations, our systematic elimination of human groups. He paused, letting his words sink in. But as I asked before, which planet are we talking about? The holographic galaxy above them pulsed brighter, its thousands of highlighted systems creating a complex pattern of lights across the spiral arms. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, some delegates began to look worried. They had been so focused on Earth's history that they had not asked about humanity's actions anywhere else. The silence in the Great Hall was complete. Not even the usual rustling of thousands of different species moving in their seats could be heard. Ambassador Taiho stood beneath the holographic galaxy, its highlighted star systems casting colored shadows across his calm face. Corvian was the first to recover from the human's question. The Velkari delegate's blue skin had darkened to a deep navy color, which those familiar with his species knew indicated either anger or confusion. His forearms moved in sharp, jerky gestures as he activated his own display controls. Ambassador Taiho, Corvian said, his voice tighter than before, we are discussing Earth because Earth is your homeworld. We are evaluating humanity's fitness for council membership based on your species' documented history of violence. Your question makes no sense. Taiho nodded slowly, as if considering this response carefully. I understand your confusion, Honored Delegate. Let me be more specific. He pressed another control on his device, and the galaxy display zoomed in on a particular section of space near Earth's solar system. You mentioned that humans have been peaceful for almost a century, Taiho said. This is true if we only look at Earth, but humans have not stayed on Earth for a century, have we? Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The human was right, of course. Human ships had been exploring and colonizing space for decades. Most species knew this, but few had paid much attention to what humans were doing in their colonies. And exploration missions. Whisperwind's fur began changing colors rapidly, cycling through nervous patterns of gray and yellow. Are you saying humans have been violent in space? She asked in her high, musical voice. We have no records of human attacks on other species. No attacks on other species, Taiho agreed. That is correct. But you asked about genocide, not attacks. The word genocide seemed to hang in the air like a living thing. Many delegates looked at each other with growing unease. What was the human trying to tell them? Bloodclaw leaned forward in his massive chair, his scarred face showing the first signs of real interest he had displayed all day. Human, speak plainly. What are you saying? Taiho smiled for the first time since the session had begun. It was not a happy smile. I am saying, honored delegates, that your research into human genocide has been incomplete. You have only looked at what we did to ourselves on our homeworld. You have not asked what we have been doing to others on other worlds. The galaxy display shifted again, zooming in on a specific star system about 40 light-years from Earth. The system's planets appeared in detail, with one world highlighted in red. Kepler 442b, Taiho said simply. Human colony established 73 years ago. Population today, 2 million humans, 300,000 Zilani refugees, and 0 Kreks. 0 Kreks? Asked a delegate from the Science Council, her tentacles curling with curiosity. But Kreks are parasitic species. They require host populations. To survive? How can there be 0 Kreks on a populated world? There are 0 Kreks, Taiho replied, his voice remaining perfectly calm, because we killed them all. The statement hit the assembly like a physical blow. Thousands of beings drew in breath at once, creating a sound like wind rushing through a vast cave. Several delegates started talking immediately, their voices mixing into chaos. Order! Called the council speaker, her gray face showing the first emotion anyone had seen from her species. Order in the assembly. When quiet returned, Carvian stood up again. His skin was now flickering between different shades of blue, a sign of extreme agitation in Valkyrie. Ambassador, are you confessing to xenocide? The complete elimination of another species? I am providing information, Taiho said. The Kreks were a parasitic species that had infected the Zilani. Population on Kepler 442b, they were slowly consuming the Zilani from the inside, using their bodies as breeding grounds. The Zilani had perhaps 5 years before complete extinction. Delegate from the Medical Alliance stood up. But surely there were other options. Quarantine? Medical treatment? Relocation? We considered all options, Taiho replied. The Kreks could not be separated from their hosts without killing both species. They could not be reasoned with as they had no higher intelligence. They could not be relocated as they would simply find new hosts. The only way to save the Zilani was to eliminate every single Kreks organism on the planet. So you committed genocide, Whisperwind said, her fur now a solid gray of shock. We committed genocide, Taiho agreed. Complete, systematic, total elimination of the Kreks species. We hunted down every last organism, from the largest breeding clusters to the smallest larvae. We sterilized entire continents with targeted biological weapons. We tracked individual Kreks through the bloodstreams of their hosts and eliminated them one by one. The hall erupted in debate again. Some delegates seemed horrified by this admission. Others appeared thoughtful, considering the moral complexity of the situation. A few species began arguing among themselves about whether such action was justified. Through it all, the holographic galaxy continued to rotate slowly, its thousands of highlighted systems pulsing like a heartbeat. Each light represented a star system. Each system might hold a world. Each world might hold a story. Bloodclaw's voice boomed over the chaos. One species! You eliminated one parasitic species to save another. This is not the same as your Earth. Genocides. Taiho looked at the massive Krogan warrior and nodded. You are absolutely right, Honored Bloodclaw. One species is not the same as the pattern of genocide you have documented from Earth's history. He pressed another control on his device. The galaxy display shifted again, highlighting a different star system, then another, then another. More and more systems began to glow with different colored lights across the spiral arms of the Milky Way. Gliese 667cc, Taiho said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. We eliminated a machine intelligence that was strip mining the planet's sentient crystal formations. Volf 1061c, we prevented a hive mind from assimilating 3 different native species. Proxima Centauri b, we stopped a bioweapon plague that was turning all organic life into viral soup. With each star system he named, more lights appeared on the galactic display. The pattern was becoming clear, and it was terrifying in its scope. Tau Ceti E eliminated an energy parasite that was draining the life force from an entire ecosystem. HD 40,307 grams stopped a reality virus that was erasing the existence of anything it touched. K22 18 billion prevented a time distortion entity from trapping the planet in an endless loop of extinction events. The list continued. Star after star, world after world, species after species, each one eliminated by humans. Each elimination complete and total. Each genocide carried out with the same systematic efficiency that had characterized humanity's worst historical moments, but these were not genocides against other humans. These were genocides against threats to the galaxy itself, the assembly. Hall had fallen completely silent again. Even the most vocal delegates sat in stunned quiet as the scope of human actions across space became clear. The galaxy display now showed thousands of highlighted systems, creating a vast network of lights that spanned multiple spiral arms. Honored delegates, Taiho said, his voice still calm but now carrying a weight that had not been there before. You asked about human genocide. You presented evidence of our capacity for systematic elimination of populations we consider threats. Your evidence was accurate and complete. He gestured at the galaxy above them, its lights pulsing in the silence. But you only asked about one planet. You only looked at what we did to ourselves on our own world before we knew better. You did not ask what we have been doing for others on their worlds, now that we do know better. The implications of his words began to sink in across. The assembly. Species that had spent hours debating whether humans were too violent to join the galactic community were now faced with a very different question. What if humans had been protecting the galactic community all along? Carvian's voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke. How many? How many what, honored delegate? How many species have you eliminated? Taiho looked at the Velkari delegate with something that might have been pity. Which category would you like? Parasitic species that were consuming other populations? Machine intelligences that were strip mining inhabited worlds? Viral plagues that were converting ecosystems into death zones? Reality distortions that were threatening the structure of space-time itself? He paused, letting the questions hang in the air. Or would you prefer the total number? The question hung in the vast assembly hall like a sword waiting to fall. Ambassador Taiho stood beneath the holographic galaxy, surrounded by thousands of alien delegates who suddenly seemed very small and very quiet. The lights from the star systems cast moving shadows across his face, making him look like a man standing in a field of fireflies. The total number, Carvian whispered, his blue skin now so dark it was almost black. The Velkari delegate's 4 arms hung limp at his sides. As if the strength had gone out of them, Taiho nodded slowly. He pressed a control on his device and numbers began appearing next to the highlighted star systems. Not just numbers of systems, but numbers of species. The mathematics of extinction began writing itself across the galaxy in glowing digits. 1,743, Taiho said simply. The number seemed impossible. Several delegates made sounds of disbelief. Others sat in shocked silence. A few began frantically operating their own data systems, trying to verify what they were hearing. "That cannot be correct," said the Science Council representative, her tentacles moving in agitated patterns. "There are not that many hostile species in the galaxy. Our surveys show only a few dozen confirmed extinction-level threats." "Your surveys," Taiho replied gently, "only count the threats that still exist." The implications of that statement rippled through the assembly like a wave. Species that had dedicated their lives to studying galactic dangers were being told that most of those dangers had already been quietly eliminated. Bloodclaw was the first to find his voice. The massive Krogan warrior had seen more violence than most beings in the galaxy, but even he seemed shaken. "Human, explain yourself. 1,000 species? That would be the largest genocide in galactic history. Larger than the Devourer Wars. Larger than the Machine Uprising. Larger than anything we have records of." "Larger than anything you have records of," Taiho agreed. "Because we made sure you would never need to have records of most of these threats." He gestured to the galaxy display, and it began zooming in on specific regions. "Let me give you some examples so you understand what we are discussing." The first system that came into focus was relatively close to Earth, only 30 light-years away. The planets appeared in detail, with one world highlighted in angry red. "HD 164,595C," Taiho began. 47 years ago, our deep space sensors detected unusual energy readings from this system. Investigation revealed a species we came to call the Hunger. They had evolved from a solar parasite, growing large enough to consume entire stars. Images began appearing around the star system display. Massive, dark creatures that looked like living black holes surrounded by the dying light of consumed suns. The Hunger reproduced by splitting like bacteria. One individual could become 2, then 4, then 8. Their reproductive cycle was linked to stellar consumption. Each star they ate gave them the energy to split again. Whisperwind's fur had turned completely white, a sign of terror in her species. But if they reproduced by consuming stars, yes, Taiho said quietly. They would eventually eat every star in the galaxy. Our mathematicians calculated that, left unchecked, the Hunger would consume all stellar bodies in the Milky Way within 3,000 years. The assembly hall was so quiet that the hum of the translation devices seemed loud. Many delegates were doing their own calculations, trying to verify the humans' mathematics. The results were confirming their worst fears. "We tracked them for 6 months, Taiho continued. Studied their life cycle, their reproductive patterns, their feeding habits. We learned everything we could about them." "And then?" asked the council speaker, her emotionless voice somehow managing to convey dread. "And then we killed them all." New images appeared around the display. Human warships, unlike any vessels the council species had ever seen. They were massive, angular things that seemed to bend light around themselves. The weapons they carried defied easy categorization. It took us 3 years to hunt down every single Hunger organism in the galaxy. They were good at hiding, excellent at camouflaging themselves among normal stellar phenomena. But we found them all. Every adult, every juvenile, every egg cluster, every trace of genetic material. Taiho pressed another control, and the images changed to show the aftermath. Star systems that had been stripped bare of light now glowed with artificial suns. Planets that had been frozen in the darkness were warming under human-built stellar engines. We also had to repair the damage they had done. 43 star systems had to be completely rebuilt. We constructed new stars, rebalanced planetary orbits, restored ecosystems that had been destroyed by stellar collapse. A delegate from the Builders Union, a species known for their engineering prowess, stood up on shaking legs. The energy requirements alone, to build that many stars? It would take our entire civilization 1,000,000 years. It took us 8 years, Taiho said simply. We built the stars, restored the planets, and relocated the surviving populations to new worlds. Most of the species involved never knew their original suns had been eaten. The galaxy display shifted to another region, highlighting systems near the galactic core. The Devourers were not the only stellar threat we have encountered. The star killers of the core regions were even more dangerous. More images appeared. Creatures that looked like geometric nightmares, all angles and impossible. Shapes that hurt to look at directly. They moved through space like living mathematics, leaving trails of collapsed reality behind them. The star killers did not eat stars, Taiho explained. They convinced stars to stop existing. They were reality viruses capable of spreading the concept of non-existence to matter and energy. Anywhere they went, the universe simply forgot that things had ever been there. Several delegates were now openly staring at the human ambassador as if he were describing the plot of a particularly disturbing science fiction story. But the evidence floating above them was real, documented, undeniable. We lost 2 entire exploration fleets before we understood what we were fighting, Taiho continued. The Star Killers did not just destroy our ships. They made it so our ships had never existed in the first place. We only knew we had lost them because of the gaps in our records, the missing personnel files, the families who remembered people who were no longer there. A hive mind representative spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of millions of connected beings. How do you fight something that erases existence itself? Carefully, Taiho replied. And with a great deal of redundancy? We developed weapons that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making them harder to erase. We created AI systems that could remember things that had been forgotten. We built ships that could reconstruct themselves from quantum echoes. If they were deleted from reality, the battle images that appeared next defied description. Human vessels fighting enemies that could not be directly observed. Weapons firing at targets that flickered in and out of existence, explosions that seemed to happen in reverse. It took us 12 years to develop effective countermeasures against the Star Killers. Another 8 years to hunt down every single one. We had to search not just current reality, but past and future timelines, alternate dimensions, and probability shadows. The display shifted again, showing a region near the galaxy's outer rim. Then there were the converters of the rim worlds. They did not destroy civilizations directly. Instead, they convinced civilizations to destroy themselves. Images of beautiful, crystalline beings appeared. They looked almost angelic, with bodies that seemed to be made of living light. Many delegates found themselves leaning forward, drawn to their apparent beauty. The converters were masters of psychological manipulation, Taiho explained. They would arrive at a populated world offering gifts, perfect art, flawless music, complete knowledge of the universe. All they asked in return was worship. That does not sound dangerous, said a representative from the Aesthetic Collective, a species devoted to beauty and art. It was not the worship that was dangerous, Taiho replied. It was what the worship led to. The converters fed on suffering. But not ordinary suffering. They required the suffering that comes from perfect beings choosing to destroy themselves. The images change, showing the aftermath of converter influence. Civilizations that had achieved utopia then systematically dismantled it. Species that had solved all their problems then created new ones. Worlds that had known perfect peace then chosen perfect war. They would give a species everything they ever wanted, then whisper suggestions about how much more meaningful it would be to give it all up, how much more pure, how much more holy. They convinced entire civilizations that self-destruction was the highest form of art. How many worlds did they convert? Whisperwind asked, her voice barely audible. We stopped counting at 300, Taiho said quietly. Entire galactic sectors had been turned into graveyards of civilizations that had chosen to end themselves. Beautiful graveyards, artistic graveyards, but graveyards nonetheless. The human ambassador looked around the assembly hall, meeting the eyes of delegates who were beginning to understand the true scope of what they were discussing. The converters were perhaps the most dangerous enemy we ever faced because they never forced anyone to do anything. They simply showed species what they could become, then suggested that not. The assembly hall had become a place of whispers and worried glances. Delegates huddled in small groups, their voices creating a low buzz of fear and confusion. The holographic galaxy above them continued to rotate, its thousands of highlighted systems now looking less like lights and more like tombstones marking the graves of extinct species. Ambassador Taiho waited patiently as the aliens processed what they had heard. He seemed completely comfortable with the silence, as if he had all the time in the universe to explain humanity's actions across the stars. Finally, a new voice cut through the whispers. It belonged to Captain Minho, a human military officer, who had been sitting quietly in the observers section. He was younger than Taiho, wearing a dark blue uniform with no visible rank insignia. When he stood up, every eye in the chamber turned toward him. "Honored delegates," Captain Minho said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Ambassador Taiho has given you some examples of our defensive operations. With the Council's permission, I would like to provide more detailed military records." The Council speaker nodded slowly. "Permission granted, Captain. But we remind you that this is a judicial proceeding, not a military briefing." "Understood," Minho replied. "However, what we are discussing are military operations, conducted by military personnel against military threats. I believe accurate tactical information will help the Council understand the scope and necessity of our actions." He activated his own display device and the galaxy above them shifted again. New layers of information began appearing around the highlighted star. Systems, dates, force compositions, casualty reports, operational timelines. The mathematics of systematic extinction were laid bare in glowing text. The hunger incident that Ambassador Taiho described was designated Operation Stellar Shield, Captain Minho began. Total deployment, 400 human vessels, including 6 heavy dreadnoughts and specialized stellar engineering platforms. Operation duration, 37 months. Enemy casualties, 100%. Human casualties, 0. The precision of the language was somehow more disturbing than the ambassador's gentler explanations. These were not philosophical discussions about moral choices. These were military after-action reports describing the complete elimination of entire species with clinical efficiency. The star killers of the galactic core were designated Operation Reality Check, Minho continued. This was a more complex engagement due to the enemy's temporal capabilities. Total deployment, 2,000 vessels across multiple timeline branches. Operation duration, 96 months subjective time, 8 years baseline time. Enemy casualties, complete existential erasure. Human casualties, 467 personnel erased from existence, later recovered through quantum archaeology. A delegate from the Timekeeper species raised a crystalline hand. "Captain, did you say you recovered personnel who had been erased from existence? That should be impossible." "It was impossible," Minho agreed, "until we developed the technology to make it possible. When you are fighting enemies that can delete things from reality itself, you learn to build redundancy into existence." The gallery display began showing technical specifications that made the alien scientists lean forward despite their fear. Weapons that fired possibility itself. Ships that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Computers that could remember things that had never happened. The technology we developed for the reality wars has since been used to protect 47 species from similar threats, Minho explained. Most of those species never knew they were in danger. We identified the reality viruses, eliminated them, and repaired any existential damage before the local populations realized their universe had been temporarily broken. Dr. Yunji stood up from another section of the observer's area. She was an older human woman wearing the simple white coat of a scientist. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her eyes held the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades solving impossible problems. "Honored Council," Dr. Yunji said, "I am a xenobiologist specializing in hostile life forms. Captain Minho has given you the military perspective on our operations. I would like to provide the scientific context." She activated her own display, and the galaxy filled with new information. Biological classification charts, evolutionary trees, ecological impact assessments, the clinical data of species that no longer existed. When we say we eliminated these species, we mean we conducted complete biological warfare against them, Dr. Yunji explained. Not just killing the adults, but destroying their reproductive cycles, their genetic material, their evolutionary potential. We made it impossible for them to ever exist again. The matter-of-fact way she said this made several delegates flinch. They were hearing a scientist calmly discuss the permanent erasure of evolutionary lineages that had taken millions of years to develop. Take the flesh weavers of the Andromeda approach, Dr. Yunji continued. They were a parasitic species that reproduced by completely rewriting the DNA of other organisms. They would infect a planet, convert all life forms into copies of themselves, then move on to the next world. Images appeared showing the results of flesh weaver infections. Planets where every animal, plant, and microorganism had been transformed into identical gray masses of writhing tissue. Entire ecosystems reduced to uniform, pulsing flesh. We tracked 17 flesh weaver infection waves across 3 galactic clusters, Dr. Yunji said. They had already consumed over 400 inhabited worlds. Each infection took approximately 6 months to complete planetary conversion. "How do you fight an enemy that can rewrite biology itself?" asked a delegate from the Lifesinger Alliance. "You rewrite it first," Dr. Yunji replied simply. "We developed targeted viruses that could recognize flesh weaver genetic patterns and delete them from any organism they had infected. We created biological weapons that could restore original DNA from quantum echoes left in cellular structures." The technical diagrams that appeared were beyond the understanding of most delegates, but the implications were clear. Humans had developed the ability to undo evolution itself, to reach into infected organisms and restore them to their original forms. "The restoration process took us 4 years to perfect," Dr. Yunji continued. "During that time, we had to keep the flesh weavers contained to prevent further spread. This required sterilizing any system they had touched, then rebuilding the ecosystems from preserved genetic samples." "You sterilized entire star systems?" Whisperwind asked, her fur cycling through colors of shock. 43 systems in total," Dr. Yunji confirmed. "Complete biological sterilization, every organic molecule broken down to component atoms, then rebuilt according to pre-infection templates. We had to be thorough because even a single flesh weaver cell could restart the infection process." The scope of what the humans were describing began to sink in among the delegates. These were not isolated incidents or defensive actions. This was systematic biological warfare conducted on a galactic scale. With humans possessing the technology to literally rebuild life itself, Captain Minho resumed his briefing. Operation BioClean took 8 years to complete. Total deployment: 600 vessels including specialized biological warfare platforms. Enemy casualties: complete species extinction across all infected systems. Collateral casualties: 0. All infected organisms were restored to pre-infection states. But the flesh weavers were not the only biological threat we have encountered, Dr. Yunji added. There were the mind-eaters, the soul viruses, the dream parasites, the memory worms. Each required different approaches, different weapons, different levels of intervention. She gestured to the galaxy display, and more systems began highlighting. In different colors. Red for biological threats, blue for technological threats, yellow for dimensional threats, green for temporal threats. The pattern that emerged was stunning in its completeness. We have encountered and eliminated hostile species in every category of threat assessment, Dr. Yunji explained. Carbon-based life forms, silicon-based intelligences, energy beings, quantum entities, mathematical constructs that achieved consciousness, and several forms of living space-time distortion. Bloodclaw, who had been silently absorbing the briefing, finally spoke up. Human scientists, you speak of these eliminations as if they were research projects. Do you feel nothing for the species you have destroyed? Dr. Yunji looked at the massive Krogan warrior with calm eyes. We feel everything, honored Bloodclaw. Every species we eliminate is a loss of knowledge, a unique evolutionary path that can never be recovered. But we also feel the weight of responsibility for the species we save. She gestured to the display again, and new numbers began appearing. Not casualties this time, but saved populations. The flesh weavers had infected 400 worlds before we stopped them. Each world held between 10 million and 50 billion sentient beings. By eliminating the flesh weavers, we saved approximately 8 trillion lives across 47 different species. The mathematics were overwhelming. For every hostile species eliminated, humans had saved dozens of innocent ones. The cost-benefit analysis was written in the stars themselves. This is why we developed such efficient elimination methods, Captain Minho added. When you are responsible for protecting trillions of... General Hyanwu stood before the assembled delegates like a statue carved from years of impossible decisions. The galaxy display behind him showed the full scope of human operations, a vast network of eliminated threats that stretched across the spiral arms like a protective web. His weathered face showed no emotion as he prepared to explain humanity's methods to beings who had never faced such choices. Honored Council, the general began, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of command. You have asked about human genocide. You have seen the evidence of our eliminations. Now I will explain how we do what we do and why we do it the way we do. He gestured to the display, and it zoomed in on a section of space near the galactic rim. 3 star systems appeared in detail, each marked with different colored indicators. Threat assessment begins with our deep space monitoring network, General Hyanwu explained. We maintain sensors throughout the galaxy that can detect unusual energy patterns, biological anomalies, temporal distortions, and reality fluctuations. When something registers as potentially dangerous, we investigate. The first star system highlighted, showing the deployment of human scout vessels. Small, fast ships that seemed designed for stealth rather than combat. Initial contact is always handled by our Pathfinder teams. These are specialists trained in xenobiology, quantum physics, temporal mechanics, and diplomatic protocols. Their job is to determine the exact nature of the threat and assess the risk level. Images appeared showing human teams in advanced environmental suits, studying strange organisms and phenomena from a careful distance. The equipment they carried was far beyond anything most council species had developed. Risk assessment follows a standardized protocol, the general continued. Category 1 threats are dangerous but containable. We monitor them and intervene only if they begin expanding. Category 2 threats are dangerous and expanding. We contain them and work on elimination methods. Category 3 threats are existential. They require immediate and complete elimination. Dr. Jisu stood up from the observers section. She was younger than Dr. Yunji, wearing the insignia of a psychological researcher. Her presence seemed to make some delegates uncomfortable, as if they sensed she studied minds as clinically as others studied biology. General Hyanwu is describing our tactical procedures, Dr. Jisu said, her voice calm and professional. But the council has also asked about the moral aspects of our operations. This is my area of expertise. She activated her own display. And the galaxy filled with psychological profiles and ethical assessments. Charts showing human mental health statistics, decision-making processes, and moral reasoning patterns. Every human involved in elimination operations undergoes extensive psychological evaluation, Dr. Jisu explained. We have learned that the capacity for systematic elimination, while necessary, can damage the individuals who carry it out. We monitor our personnel carefully to prevent the development of pathological attitudes. The data she showed was disturbing in its thoroughness. Psychological profiles of soldiers who had participated in genocide detailed studies of how eliminating entire species affected human mental health, treatment protocols for what the files labeled as necessary guilt syndrome. We have found that humans who participate in elimination operations without feeling guilt or remorse become dangerous to friendly species as well, Dr. Jisu continued. Therefore, we actually want our personnel to be disturbed by what they do. We want them to understand the moral weight of extinction. A delegate from the Ethics Council raised a tentacle. Doctor, are you saying you deliberately maintain psychological distress in your military personnel? We maintain moral awareness. Dr. Jisu corrected. There is a difference between someone who kills because they must and someone who kills because they enjoy it. We ensure our personnel remain in the first category through careful selection, training, and ongoing psychological support, she gestured. To the display, and case studies appeared. Individual humans who had participated in elimination operations, their psychological profiles tracked over years of service. Take Sergeant Jiho, who participated in Operation BioClean against the Flesh Weavers. Pre-operation assessment showed normal moral reasoning and appropriate empathy responses. Post-operation assessment showed elevated guilt indicators and recurring nightmares about the species we eliminated. That sounds like trauma, Whisperwind said, her fur showing concerned patterns. It is trauma, Dr. Jisu agreed. Necessary trauma. Sergeant Jiho received counseling and support, but we did not try to eliminate his guilt feelings. His guilt proves that he still understands the moral weight of extinction. Personnel who do not develop guilt responses are transferred to non-elimination duties. The psychological profiles were deeply detailed, showing how humans process the moral implications of genocide. The data revealed species-wide protocols for managing the psychological cost of protecting the galaxy through systematic elimination. General Hyunwoo resumed his briefing. Dr. Jisu has explained our personnel management. Now let me explain our operational methods. The display shifted to show tactical diagrams of elimination operations. The level of planning and coordination was staggering. Humans had turned genocide into a precise science. Complete elimination requires 3 phases, the general explained. Identification, isolation, and eradication. Each phase has specific protocols designed to ensure no hostile organisms survive while minimizing damage to innocent species. The first diagram showed the identification phase. Human teams studying hostile species in minute detail, mapping their biology, psychology, reproduction cycles, and weaknesses. We study our targets for months or years before beginning elimination, General Hyunwoo said. We need to understand every aspect of their existence to ensure complete eradication. Partial elimination often makes threats more dangerous, not less. Images appeared showing the depth of human research. Complete genetic maps of hostile species, psychological profiles of individual organisms, detailed studies of reproduction, feeding, and social structures. Take the dream parasites of the Veil Nebula, the general continued. They existed partially in normal space and partially in the dimension of sleep. They fed by entering the dreams of sentient beings and slowly consuming their consciousness from within. The tactical display showed the complexity of fighting an enemy that existed in dreams. Human forces deployed in both physical space and what the files called oneric combat zones. Standard weapons were useless against the dream parasites because they could simply retreat into sleep space when attacked. We had to develop new technologies that could follow them into dreams and eliminate them there. You developed weapons that work in dreams? Asked a delegate from the Mindwalker species. Beings who specialized in consciousness research. We developed soldiers who could fight in dreams, General Hyunwoo corrected. The Oneric Combat Division trains personnel to maintain combat effectiveness while asleep. They learn to carry weapons and tactics into their dreams, to coordinate attacks across the sleep space dimension. The images that followed were surreal, humans fighting battles in landscapes made of memory and nightmare, using weapons forged from lucid dreaming techniques against enemies that existed only in the spaces between thoughts. The dream parasite elimination took 4 years of real-time combat and approximately 40 years of subjective, dream-time combat, the general explained. We had to hunt them through the collective unconscious of 17 different species, tracking them through nightmares, childhood memories, and forgotten dreams. Researcher Yuna stood up from the scientific section. She was middle-aged, wearing the practical clothing of someone who spent time in the field rather than in laboratories. Her hands showed the scars of someone who had worked directly with dangerous specimens. The Council should understand that our elimination methods are not chosen for efficiency alone, researcher Yuna said. They are designed to minimize suffering while ensuring completeness. She activated her display, showing comparative studies of different elimination techniques. The data was clinical but somehow more horrifying for its precision. When we eliminated the pain feeders of the Dark Nebula, we could have used standard weapons, Yuna explained. But pain feeders actually grow stronger when they or other organisms suffer. Using conventional weapons would have made them more powerful. So how did you eliminate them? Bloodclaw asked, his warrior's curiosity overcoming his growing unease. We developed weapons that induced perfect happiness, Yuna replied. The pain feeders died of joy. They experienced such complete bliss that their consciousness simply dissolved into pure contentment. The moral complexity of this revelation swept through the assembly. Humans had committed genocide by making their enemies too happy to exist. The psychological implications were staggering. Similarly, when we faced the entropy cult, a species that worshipped universal decay, we could not use destructive weapons because destruction was what they wanted, Yuna continued. Instead, we trapped them in fields of perfect preservation. They experienced eternal, unchanging existence until their minds could no longer handle the lack of entropy. Admiral Jayan rose from his position at the back of the human delegation. He was the oldest of the human representatives. Admiral Jayun's words echoed through the vast assembly hall like stones dropped into still water. The ripples of his question spread outward, touching every delegate, every species, every carefully held belief about morality and survival. The holographic galaxy above them seemed to pulse with new meaning, each light no longer just representing an eliminated threat, but a civilization that might not exist without human intervention. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then unbearable. Finally, a small voice broke it. "Admiral," said Whisperwind, the Nethid delegate, her fur cycling through colors of confusion and dawning realization, "are you saying that our worlds ... our peoples? We owe our existence to human genocide?" Before Admiral Jayan could answer, Dr. Yunji stepped forward. Her scientific mind had been working through the implications during the silence, and her face showed the terrible clarity of someone who had just solved an equation they wished they hadn't. "Honored delegates," Dr. Yunji said, her voice gentler than it had been when discussing elimination techniques, "perhaps we should examine some specific cases. Computer, display the Nethid system analysis." The galaxy view shifted and zoomed in on the Nethid home system. The peaceful garden world, where Whisperwind's people had evolved, appeared in perfect detail, surrounded by orbital habitats and agricultural satellites. The Nethid system is considered one of the most stable and peaceful in this sector of the galaxy, Dr. Yunji explained. Your people have never experienced major wars, natural disasters, or ecological collapse. Your evolution has been remarkably smooth and undisturbed. "Yes," Whisperwind said, her fur showing proud patterns of green and gold. "We are blessed with a harmonious world. Our philosophers teach that the universe favors peaceful species." Dr. Yunji's expression grew sad. "Computer, display subsurface scan of Nethid homeworld, geological layer 7. The image of the beautiful garden world changed, showing its deep underground structure. There, embedded in the rock layers like fossils, were vast networks of tunnels and chambers, but these were not natural formations. 300 years ago, your world was infested with burrowing devourers, Dr. Yunji said softly. They were a parasitic species that lived deep underground, slowly consuming planetary cores from within. Infected worlds typically collapsed within 500 years as their structural integrity was eaten away. Whisperwind's fur turned completely white with shock. Around the hall, other delegates began checking their own data systems, looking up information about their homeworlds that they had never thought to investigate. The burrowing devourers were in the late stages of consuming your planet's core when we eliminated them, Dr. Yunji continued. We had to use deep penetration weapons that could reach the planet's center without causing surface damage. The operation took 2 years and required us to essentially sterilize your world's entire subsurface ecosystem, then rebuild it with non-parasitic organisms. But we have no records of this, Whisperwind stammered. Our geological surveys show no signs of such creatures. Because we removed all traces of them, Dr. Yunji explained. Part of our elimination protocol includes environmental restoration. We could not leave evidence of the devourers because other members of their species might have used that evidence to reinfect your world. The implications rippled through the assembly. If the Nethid's peaceful evolution had been protected by human genocide, what about other species? Captain Minho stepped forward, consulting a datapad. Computer, display the Krogan incident files. Bloodclaw's massive head turned toward the human officer, his scarred face showing sudden tension. What incident? The galaxy display shifted. To show the Krogan home system, with its harsh worlds and warrior culture clearly visible in the orbital infrastructure. The Krogan people pride themselves on being the galaxy's greatest warriors, Captain Minho said carefully. Your entire culture is built around combat, honor, and facing impossible odds. You have legends about ancient enemies that your ancestors defeated in glorious battle. Yes, Bloodclaw growled, his voice carrying pride and suspicion in equal measure. We are warriors, we fight our own battles. Computer, display Operation Ancestral Shield, classified files. The display filled with images that made even Bloodclaw draw back in his seat. Ancient creatures that looked like living nightmares, all teeth and claws and impossible anatomy. They moved through space like predatory fish, hunting entire fleets, as if they were schools of prey. The Void Hunters, Captain Minho said. Your ancestors' greatest enemies, according to Krogan legends. The monsters that tested your people's warrior spirit in the early days of your space travel. Yes, Bloodclaw sighed, but his voice was quieter now. Our legends say we drove them back into the dark between stars. Your legends are partially correct, Captain Minho replied. You did fight them. Your ancestors showed incredible courage against impossible odds, but you did not drive them away. You were losing badly. New images appeared, showing the scope of the ancient conflict. Krogan fleets being systematically destroyed, colony worlds stripped bare, the warrior species being hunted to near extinction by predators perfectly evolved to kill them. When we encountered the Void Hunters, they had already eliminated 60% of your population, Captain Minho continued. Your remaining fleets were scattered, your colonies were cut off, and your homeworld was under siege. You had perhaps 10 years before complete extinction. Bloodclaw's hands were gripping his chair so tightly that the metal was beginning to creak. You eliminated the Void Hunters? We eliminated them so completely that we had to alter your historical records to maintain your cultural identity. Captain Minho confirmed. Krogan society is built around the concept of honorable combat. If you had known that you were saved by outside intervention rather than your own warrior prowess, it would have destroyed your cultural foundation. The massive Krogan warrior sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation that his people's greatest triumph had been a human rescue operation disguised as a Krogan victory. Around the hall, delegates were frantically accessing their own historical databases, searching for gaps, inconsistencies, or unexplained events that might indicate similar interventions. Ambassador Yuna stepped forward, her expression showing the weight of someone about to reveal uncomfortable truths to an entire galaxy. Honored delegates, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. What you are discovering is the reality of galactic civilization. Nearly every species represented in this chamber owes its existence to human elimination operations. She gestured to the galaxy display, and it began highlighting systems in a new pattern. Not the sites of eliminated threats, but the locations of saved civilizations. The crystalline collective was saved from silicon viruses that would have turned your living crystal structures into dead glass. The Hivemind Alliance was protected from individuality plagues that would have shattered your collective consciousness into isolated fragments. The tree singer forests were preserved from silence worms that consume sound itself. With each revelation, more delegates fell silent. The scope of human protection was becoming clear, and it was vast beyond imagination. But the most disturbing truth, Ambassador Yuna continued, is not that we have been protecting you. It is that most of these threats were created by species that had already been eliminated. This statement caused a new wave of confusion and fear to sweep through the assembly. What do you mean? Asked the council speaker, her emotionless voice somehow managing to convey urgency. We mean that the galaxy is not naturally this dangerous, Dr. Yunji explained, stepping forward to support Ambassador Yuna. The concentration of existential threats we have encountered is far above statistical probability. Someone or something has been deliberately creating or directing these threats. The implications of this revelation struck the assembly like a physical blow. They were not just learning about human protection operations, they were discovering that someone had been waging war against galactic civilization itself. We have identified patterns in the threat distributions, Dr. Yunji continued. The timing of attacks, the types of organisms involved, the strategic targeting of key civilizations. This is not random evolution or natural disaster. This is coordinated assault. Admiral Jayan stepped forward again, his weathered face showing the strain of carrying such knowledge for decades. Honored Council, he said, we have been fighting a shadow war against an enemy we have never seen directly. An enemy that creates weapons out of living species, that turns evolution itself into a tool of destruction, that has been systematically trying to eliminate all higher civilization in the galaxy. But if you have eliminated over 1,700 hostile species, Corvian said, his blue skin pale with shock, surely you have found some trace of this enemy? We have found traces, Admiral Jayan replied grimly. Genetic markers that appear in multiple species across vast distances. Technological signatures in creatures that should not possess technology. Communication networks that connect threats, separated by thousands of light years. The galaxy display changed again, showing a new pattern. Not individual threats, but connection lines between them. A vast web of coordination that spanned the entire galaxy, with Earth sitting at the center of the defensive response. The great assembly hall had become a place of whispered conferences and worried glances. Delegates huddled in species groups, their voices creating a low buzz of fear, confusion, and heated debate. The holographic galaxy above them had become something different than when the session began. What had started as a simple star chart was now a map of salvation and terror, showing both the scope of human protection and the vast shadow war that most civilizations had never known existed. Council Speaker Nexus called for order, her gray face showing more emotion than most delegates had ever seen from her species. The Council will now enter deliberation phase. We have heard extensive testimony regarding human military operations across the galaxy. The question before us remains, should humanity be granted membership in the Galactic Council? But even as she spoke, many delegates knew that the original question had become meaningless. The issue was no longer whether humans deserved membership, but whether the existing council was prepared for the reality of what membership with humanity would mean. Corvian stood up slowly, his blue skin cycling through colors that indicated deep confusion and moral conflict. Honored Speaker, I request clarification of the charges. When we began this session, we were evaluating humanity for historical genocide on their homeworld. Now we discover they have committed systematic genocide across the entire galaxy. How do we reconcile these facts? Admiral Jayan looked at the Valkyrie delegate with something that might have been sympathy. Honored Corvian, you are trying to apply traditional moral frameworks to a situation that exists outside traditional morality. We are not asking you to approve of our methods. We are asking you to acknowledge the necessity of our results. But genocide is genocide, protested a delegate from the Ethics Collective. The systematic elimination of entire species cannot be justified, regardless of the reasons. Cannot be justified to whom? Dr. Jasu asked, stepping forward with her psychological profiles still glowing in the air around her. To the 8 trillion beings who are alive today because we eliminated the flesh weavers? To the nethid children who play in gardens that exist because we eliminated the burrowing devourers? To the Krogan warriors who sing victory songs about battles they never really won? The moral complexity of the situation was tearing at the philosophical foundations that many species used to understand right and wrong. How do you condemn